The word solstice means sun standing in Latin. It marks the point when the sun stops at its most northerly or southerly point, relative to the equator. Before reversing direction, the summer solstice, the sun would appear at its highest point in the sky. And it is the day with the longest period of daylight. It happens twice a year, once in both the northern and southern hemispheres. The summer solstice in the northern hemisphere occurs around the 21st of June, but it does not always occur on this day. As it all depends on when the sun reaches its northernmost point from the celestial equator, it can happen between the 20th to the 22nd of June. Around this time in areas north of the Arctic Circle, it is possible to witness the sun not set at all. So it is dubbed the land of the midnight sun for this very reason. This occurs because the Earth's rotational axis is tilted. The Earth rotates around an axis inclined at an angle of 23.5 degrees in relation to its orbital plane around the Sun. It is this tilt that gives us our seasons. Summer occurs in the hemisphere that is tilted towards the Sun, while winter falls on the hemisphere that is tilted away from the Sun. A sea breeze is an onshore breeze that develops around the coastlines of the sea and even large lakes on warm days. In mid-latitudes, it commonly occurs during the spring and summer when there is a large temperature difference between the sea and adjacent land areas. A sea breeze is a thermally driven circulation, forming due to the fact that the land heats up more quickly than the sea. Water has a higher specific heat capacity and so requires more energy to raise its temperature. As the sun radiates energy at more or less a constant rate, it will take longer for the water to heat up. This means that peak sea surface temperatures aren't reached until early autumn. This differential heating of adjacent land and sea surfaces is the main factor in the formation of sea breezes. A temperature difference of around 3 degrees Celsius is required for sea breezes to start to develop. Other factors that are required for sea breezes to form are light offshore winds at around 3,000 feet. This aids the higher level flow out to sea to get the process started. After World War II, European countries increased their efforts to live peacefully together on their small continent. To improve business and trade, 6 countries, Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, came together in 1958 to create a common economy and currency. These countries agreed not to use trade barriers like tariffs, embargoes, or quotas with each other. This led to a more prosperous economy in these countries. As the years went on, more European countries joined this group called the European Union, or EU for short. There are currently 21 countries in the EU after the United Kingdom left. And there are other countries like Turkey that hope to join the EU. The EU worked to help create jobs in poor parts of Europe and pass laws to protect the environment. The group or union focused on the idea that all goods, services, people, and money should be able to move freely through the EU countries. Europeans no longer had to carry their passports when traveling between the EU countries. They could instead travel from country to country much like the people in the United States travel from state to state. Sweetened condensed milk is a good ingredient for sweet recipes because of all the added sugar, about 25% by weight. But when sweetened condensed milk was invented in the 1800s, the original reason for adding sugar to the milk was not for flavor, but for protection against spoilage. And it works even after you open the can. Sweetened condensed milk keeps longer than fresh milk. That added sugar kills bacteria that would otherwise digest the milk and spoil it. The sugar kills not by poisoning the bacteria, but by a more direct physical process. It draws water out of the bacteria so the bacterial cells shrivel and die. Each bacterial cell has a sort of skin, technically, a membrane. Water can pass through this membrane pretty easily, but substances dissolved in the water can't. Water has a natural tendency to move toward any region where there's a high concentration of dissolved substances. A bacterial cell in a can of sweetened condensed milk finds itself immersed in an extremely concentrated solution of sugar. Water inside the cell will, therefore, pass out through the cell membrane into the sugary solution. The bacterial cell dehydrates and dies in a sea of sugary water. Sugar added to fruit has the same effect. That's the idea behind fruit preserves. Other foods are preserved with salt, exploiting the same principle. Steam is water that's heated to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Believe it or not, steam is invisible. You can see right through it. If you look closely at the end of your kettle's spout, you'll notice that the white stuff doesn't start right away. It begins billowing about half an inch away from the nozzle, with clear gas in between. This clear gas is the actual steam. The billowy white stuff is what the steam turns into when it hits the drier, cooler air of your kitchen. Those white billows are, in fact, clouds, not steam. In many ways, they are identical to the clouds you can see in the sky. The white color comes from tiny liquid water droplets that have condensed from the steam. More accurately, these billows are a type of cloud called a mixing cloud. These can form when two separate air masses with different temperatures and different amounts of water in them mix together. In the case of your kettle, the hot, steamy gas cools rapidly in the kitchen air. And this sudden coolness is what makes some of the vapor condense. Mixing clouds are pretty common, and they don't need to start with steam. You see mixing clouds when you see your breath on a cold winter day. You'll find them rising from a bowl of warm soup. Wherever there's a mixing cloud, you can bet some warm, moist air is mixing with air that's cooler and drier. Why does altitude cause a headache? Since the air is thinner at higher altitudes, there is less oxygen in the blood, so blood flow to the brain increases. The extra blood can cause blood vessels to swell and tissues to press on the sensitive membrane that surrounds the brain, resulting in a headache. But not everyone develops a headache at moderately high altitudes, partly because the low oxygen content of the air causes the climber to breathe more often, forcing carbon dioxide out of the blood. The body reacts to the lowered carbon dioxide content of the blood by decreasing blood flow to the brain. An individual's susceptibility to altitude-induced headache, as well as the severity of the headache, depends on whether the overall blood flow to the brain increases or decreases. At high altitudes, usually over 10,000 feet, an unrelated condition known as high-altitude cerebral edema, or ASE, can develop. ASE occurs when parts of the brain become waterlogged. Unlike altitude-induced headache, which occurs in over 90% of the people who ascend to 11,000 feet. ASE is a rare disorder, characterized by mental confusion, hallucinations, and a drunken stagger. ASE is almost always fatal if descent is not immediate. Blood types are inherited, just like you inherit your eye color or your hair texture, so you get a gene from each parent, and that determines what the child's blood type is going to be. There's sort for blood types? There is A, type B, type AB, and type O. The only difference is what sugar molecule is added to that point. There are some studies that show that the reason that A, B, O and AB have been distributed the way they were was because of forces that they think of primarily connected to the organism that causes malaria. It turned out to be that people who had type O were actually able to survive an attack of malaria. It appeared that the malaria organism was more readily able to attach to red blood cells that were type A or type B, and actually kill those patients before they have a chance to reproduce. Those people who had type O actually would get sick, but wouldn't die, and had an opportunity to reproduce, and that's how the gene goes forward. And then, if you look at a map of where malaria is now and where the different peoples are, you can see that the type O was followed. There is where there's malaria, A, and B has gone to colder climates where malaria wasn't a problem, and then AB was just, a combination of the races. Evolution is a scientific theory used by biologists. It explains how living things change over a long time and how they have come to be the way they are. The Earth has been around for a very long time. By doing research on the layers of rock, we can find out about its past. That kind of research is called historical geology. We know that living things have changed over time because we can see their remains in the rocks. These remains are called fossils. So we know that the animals and plants of today are different from those of long ago. And the further we go back, the more different the fossils are. How has this come about? That evolution has taken place is a fact because it is overwhelmingly supported by many lines of evidence. At the same time, evolutionary questions are still being actively researched by biologists. Comparison of DNA sequences allows organisms to be grouped by how similar their sequences are. In 2010, an analysis compared sequences to phylogenetic trees and supported the idea of common descent. There is now strong quantitative support for a formal test for the unity of life. The theory of evolution is the basis of modern biology. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. A UFO, unidentified flying object, is any object flying in the sky which cannot be identified by the person who sees it. Sometimes, the object is investigated. If people can still not figure out what the object is after an investigation, it's called a UFO. If they figure out what the object is, it can no longer be called a UFO because it has been identified. Even though UFOs can be anything, people often use the word UFO when they're talking about alien spacecraft. Flying saucer is another word that is often used to describe an unidentified flying object. Studies estimate that 50 to 90% of all reported UFO sightings are identified later, usually 10 to 20% are never identified. Studies also show that very few UFO sightings are hoaxes, people trying to trick other people. Most UFOs are actually natural or man-made objects that look strange. 80 to 90% of UFOs are identified as one of three different things: astronomical causes, for example, planets, stars, or meteors, aircraft, balloons, including weather balloons. 10 to 20% of UFOs are other causes, such as birds, clouds, mirages, searchlights, etc. Let's look at the size of rain and how raindrops fall. First, we'll need the sun. When the sun shines on water on the Earth's surface, the heat of the sun warms the water, turning it into an invisible gas called water vapor. This process, the changing of water into a gas, is called evaporation. Because gases are lighter than liquids, water vapor rises up into the sky, and the further you move up and away from the Earth's surface, the colder the temperature gets. So in the sky, the water vapor cools and changes back into tiny water droplets. This change is called condensation, and is the opposite of evaporation. Clouds are made up of tiny water droplets. So when condensation occurs in the sky, clouds form and grow. Let's take a closer look. When water droplets bump into one another, they stick together and grow in size. They continue to grow until they are too heavy and fall as rain. They even grow as they bump into one another on their journey from the cloud to the ground, and every single raindrop that reaches the ground is made up of 1 million of the original tiny water droplets. Raindrops fall onto the ground surface, or the sun can shine on them, and the whole process happens again. This is called the water cycle and keeps water moving from the ground to the sky, providing the water needed for plants, animals, and people to survive. What is precipitation? Clouds hold millions of tiny water droplets. Over time, a cloud can hold more and more tiny droplets of water and pieces of ice. Wind and hot temperature make the droplets and pieces bump into each other. They then group together. They get bigger and heavier until they are too heavy to stay in the cloud. They fall to the ground as something called precipitation. Precipitation can include rain, snow, hail, or sleet. Precipitation can form into different types. This is because the differences in temperatures. If the air between the cloud and the ground is warm, the precipitation will fall as rain. If the rain freezes between the cloud and the ground, it becomes sleet. If the air is in the cloud and it blows very cold, the precipitation will fall as snow. Hail forms when ice crystals get blown upward inside of a cloud over and over. The ice will get bigger and bigger each time until it finally falls from the sky. Sleet is smaller than hail. Sleet falls in cold weather. Precipitation comes from storms. Thunderstorms are the most common type of storm. They are caused when warm, wet air hits cold, dry air. The warm, wet air rises fast to form huge clouds. Humans are pretty lucky with the way we can communicate. Unlike animals, we have the perfect length necks and excellent control of our breaths. Both of these characteristics allow us to form words. Although animals can't talk like us, they still have special ways to communicate. For example, dolphins have one of the most sophisticated forms of communication. They make distinct whistling sounds that help identify themselves. Dolphins may also squeak or yelp depending on the situation. Nevertheless, each sound releases meaningful information. You have probably heard some birds say words just like us, but they are merely repeating what they hear. Most birds communicate through songs and squawks that can be beautiful for us to listen to. Other animals communicate without making a sound. Elephants show affection by wrapping their trunks around each other. Whales leap out of the water to send messages to their friends. Bees perform a special dance when they have located nectar in a tree. Even if it's just our pet dog wagging his tail or a pet cat purring. All animals have their own way to convey information to us and each other. There are 118 species of weaver birds, and most live in sub-Saharan Africa. While some species live on the open savanna and eat mostly seeds, others live in forests and prefer feasting on insects. Researchers looked at studies done on different species of weaver birds to examine the relationships between their diets, habits, and social behavior. They found that seed-eating birds living in the open savanna tended to forage in groups, nest in large colonies, and have multiple mates per breeding season. The insect-eating, forest-dwelling birds, on the other hand, were more likely to forage and nest alone, and have a single mate per season. These divergent social behaviors are likely influenced by their different diets and habitats. Working together makes it easier for birds that eat seeds out on the savanna to find spots with a large supply of seeds. There's also safety in numbers out on the open savanna, further incentivizing flocking. Their polygamous breeding may be a result of the smaller number of nesting sites in the savanna. By contrast, working together to find food wouldn't help forest-dwelling, insect-eating weaver birds as much, since insects tend to be more widely dispersed. There are a lot more suitable nesting sites in the forest, so these birds don't need to live in colonies, and monogamy makes sense for birds with more solitary lives. It seems that birds that eat bugs don't like to be bugged. Dogs are noted for their extreme friendliness towards humans. They crave human company and gaze intently at their human companions. The partnership between dogs and humans stretches back tens of thousands of years into prehistoric times. It has worked out surprisingly well for dogs, who, with human backing, have become Earth's most abundant land carnivore. Dogs evolved from wolves through a process of domestication by humans. Even when they are hand-raised by humans, modern wolves seldom show the degree of devotion to humans that dogs do. This has led scientists to suspect that the hypersociality of dogs towards humans is more than just a learned trait, and has to do with evolved genetic differences between dogs and wolves. In 2022, a team of American geneticists published findings identifying genetic differences between dogs and wolves that may be responsible for the special canine attachment to humans. On chromosome number 6 of the dog genome, the researchers identified several genes associated with dog hypersociality. Interestingly, these genes correspond to parts of the human genome that are also involved in social behavior. Specifically, mutations in the corresponding part of the human genome can lead to a rare condition called Williams-Beuren syndrome. People with this syndrome have hypersocial behavior like that of dogs, along with certain cognitive deficits. Researchers have found evidence that dogs may have cognitive deficits like those of people with this syndrome. The findings might tell us about far more than just how social devotion to humans evolved in dogs. Given the genetic similarities, they may tell us much about how social behavior evolved in humans. When something angers us, humans have rapid cognitions that motivate us to improve our mood. But anger itself can inhibit our ability to reach equilibrium. We see this in how angry people ruminate on how bad they feel, or how they try to vent their anger and end up prompting aggression. So, there must be a better way to regulate emotion aside from ruminating and venting that help keep aggression at bay. And it turns out, that has a lot to do with how much a person is aware of and able to classify their emotions. This is called emotion differentiation. For example, if people lack the capacity to describe and classify what they are feeling at a given time, they will find it difficult to discern more detail about their emotions beyond the fact that they feel bad. Low emotion differentiators are more distracted and less engaged during times of stress, and also less capable of thinking carefully about their options for how to behave under stress. High emotion differentiators spend less time on counterproductive practices, such as ruminating and venting. When people are better at differentiating their negative emotions, they have better emotional control, which means they have more ways of dealing with anger. So, they're less likely to turn to aggression in the first place. Feeling angry is a part of life. But being aware of what kind of negativity you're feeling can help you control it and get over it. Man's best friend has long worked alongside humans to guard, hunt, and herd. Research suggests that over thousands of years, some dogs got bigger due to the nature of their job, as important managers of livestock, early canines doubled in size to protect their flocks from predators. A study of ancient canine bone fragments and teeth in Croatia determined that 8,000 years ago, Neolithic farmers immigrated to the area with their furry friends in tow. This early breed weighed a little over 30 pounds. 2 millennia later, at the start of the Bronze Age, dogs averaged about 40 pounds. By the Roman period, 2,000 years ago, dogs clocked in at more than 50 pounds. In other words, dogs went from the size of a large beagle to the size of a husky. That's some major growth in just 6,000 years. The increased size wasn't happenstance. Villages were becoming bigger, needing more land to grow crops. This meant livestock were pastured further from villages, often in the mountains. So, dogs' job responsibilities expanded as well. They not only had to travel long distances, they had to scare off hungry bears and wolves. Farmers, wanting the best guardians for their herds, selectively bred their dogs to be larger. Human activities, such as burning fossil fuels, are warming Earth's climate. The climate crisis has widespread ramifications. Ecologists are worried that many species will become extinct because they might not be able to adapt to a climate change that's faster than most naturally occurring ones. It's possible that some plants and animals could adapt by shifting their habitats towards Earth's poles or towards higher elevations to avoid the heat. Since ecosystems are varied and complex, ecologists can only find out by studying many specific cases. A team of American ecologists explored this possibility for a species of hummingbirds native to North America's west coast, called Anna's hummingbird. The researchers published their findings in 2022. Anna's hummingbirds live in California's lowlands, but migrate upslope into the cooler mountains during the summer. If climate warming continues, the team hypothesized, the birds might adapt by migrating farther up. To test whether this was really possible, the researchers studied the effects of relocating a group of Anna's hummingbirds to a higher altitude. They captured the birds from across their normal range in the Sierra Nevada and moved them to a research station near a mountain peak 4,000 feet higher than the birds normally venture. They found that the hummingbirds had big difficulties adapting to the lower air pressure and oxygen levels, which caused a drop in their metabolic rate and flight efficiency. Although the researchers still want to study the effects of longer exposure, their tentative conclusion was that it would be hard for the birds to adapt. Their results remind us how complicated an animal's environmental requirements are. Fish are important because they help maintain the health of marine ecosystems and provide support to other marine life. They are an important part of the food web because they are predators to smaller organisms and prey to marine mammals and seabirds globally. They also support humans. About 80 million tons of fish are harvested annually. This volume is enough to feed all Filipinos with their annual fish consumption for 20 years. And there are currently about 60 million people working in the fishing industry globally. But on a global scale, 33% of fisheries are overfished, meaning too many fish are being harvested. This may cause fish populations to become depleted and not able to recover. 67% are fully exploited, meaning additional fishing effort could lead to the fisheries collapse. Only 10% have room to grow, with just 10% of the fisheries having a room to grow. We might experience a global fishing crisis. David Olivia Garcia is a co-host of New Mexico in Focus and is also the managing editor for the New Mexico Independent, which is an online news site. He says that the internet has some great benefits for journalism. The internet is this new, amazing medium. Not so new, it's been around quite some time now. But it's maturing as, among other things, a place for journalism. In a sense, the internet allows you to tell stories better than in a newspaper or on television. For this reason, you can do it all online. You can have the written word. You can have still photographs, you can have video. You can link and kind of connect to the other journalism that has been done on a given topic. So it's not like you're in a vacuum. The internet has had a negative impact on these papers. However, John Fleck, who is a columnist for the Albuquerque Journal and also has his own blog, says that he doesn't think that's entirely the case. It really makes me more efficient as a journalist in terms of information gathering, confirmation, helping me get the background necessary to write a story. So it's really good for that. Electricity is the physical flow of electrons referred to as an electrical current. Electricity is an energy carrier that efficiently delivers the energy found in primary sources to end users, who in turn convert it into energy services. Electricity can be created in three main ways. The most common is through electromagnetic conversion, where electricity is generated by moving an electric conductor, like wires, inside a magnetic field. The most practical example of this is a generator connected to a turbine. The turbine provides the motion required to move the conductor in the generator. This energy from motion can come from various technologies. For example, wind turbines, hydro, or the steam created from heat produced by nuclear fission or coal combustion. Electricity can also be created through a chemical reaction. An example of this is a battery or fuel cell. Finally, electricity can be created through solid-state conversion, where electricity is generated using the structure and properties of a solid. A specially constructed solid consists of different molecules packed closely together to create an electric current when stimulated. An example of a technology that utilizes solid-state conversion is a solar PV cell. It is important to note that electricity is the same regardless of how it is produced. So the electricity generated from an electromagnetic generator is the same as that from a battery. When human females are pregnant, they're advised to stay away from alcohol, for fear of harming the fetus. And most parents refrain from giving their infants bottles full of whiskey or beer, for obvious reasons. But if you're a fruit fly, literally dousing your offspring in alcohol is apparently one of the best ways to protect them from danger, particularly from certain types of wasps. How and why? Let's back up a bit. First, certain types of wasps prey on fruit flies by injecting eggs inside fruit fly larvae. Unless an infected larva kills the wasp egg, it hatches, and the wasp larvae eats its way out from inside the fruit fly larva, killing it. One way for fruit fly moms to protect against this gruesome fate is to lay their eggs in an alcohol-soaked environment, such as fermenting fruit, when they see that parasitic wasps are around. Although alcohol is toxic to fruit flies, it's even more toxic to wasps, which, unlike fruit flies, have not evolved a high level of alcohol tolerance. So if the larvae eat enough alcohol-rich food, it can kill the wasp egg and keep it from hatching. Apparently, fruit flies are not the only fly species to use alcohol to protect their young. In fact, it seems that most flies that eat rotting fruit use the alcohol defense against wasps. So fruit flies are not unique in this regard. But they're still mighty impressive. Electricity storage systems are the set of methods and technologies used to store electricity. The need for electricity storage is due to an imbalance in supply and demand on the electrical grid due primarily to an increase in renewable energy generation. These supply and demand discrepancies occur because renewables are intermittent, meaning electricity isn't produced when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, even though consumers still require electricity in these renewable downtimes. Currently, grids distribute electricity in real time, meaning electricity is being consistently produced to meet consumer demand. Electricity storage gives grid operators the flexibility to use electricity that otherwise would be wasted. This grid flexibility is highly sought after and has the potential to transform how we produce and consume electricity, and is therefore being widely researched and tested. There are many different forms of electricity storage. The most common being battery, pumped hydro, compressed air, and flywheel. Currently, the largest challenges in implementing electricity storage at the grid scale are the cost and the infancy of the technology that's electricity storage. About 71% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, and we can harness some of it to create energy. The two most common water energy technologies are hydropower and tidal power. Hydropower is electrical energy derived from falling or running water. The movement of the water turns the blades of a turbine, which is connected to a generator, which produces electricity. Hydropower is the most commonly used form of renewable energy. Tidal power converts the natural rise and fall of the tides into electricity using a variety of technologies including tidal fences, garages, and turbines. Additionally, wave power can be harnessed to capture energy from waves on the surface of the ocean using a special buoy. Energy from water is considered a renewable energy resource because it uses the Earth's water cycle and gravitational pull to generate electricity. It also does not directly emit greenhouse gas emissions or air pollutants. However, depending on the water energy technology, negative environmental land use impacts can be an issue. Water is also heavily used in energy production processes. For example, water is used in power generation to generate steam, cool nuclear thermal plants, extract and process fossil fuels, and to irrigate biofuel crops. Natural gas is primarily methane or CH4, with smaller quantities of other hydrocarbons. It was formed millions of years ago when dead organisms sunk to the bottom of the ocean and were buried under deposits of sedimentary rock. Subject to intense heat and pressure, these organisms underwent a transformation in which they were converted to gas over millions of years. Natural gas is found underground rocks, called reservoirs. The rocks have tiny spaces, called pores, that allow them to hold water, natural gas, and sometimes oil. The natural gas is trapped underground by impermeable rock, called a caprock, and stays there until it is extracted. Natural gas can be categorized as dry or wet. Dry gas is essentially gas that contains mostly methane. Wet gas, on the other hand, contains compounds such as ethane and butane. In addition to methane, these natural gas liquids, or NGLs for short, can be separated and sold individually for various uses, such as in refrigerants and to produce products like plastics. Conventional natural gas can be extracted for drilling wells. Unconventional forms of natural gas, like shale gas, tight gas, sour gas, and coalbed methane, has specific extraction techniques. Natural gas can also be found in reservoirs with oil and is sometimes extracted alongside oil. This type of natural gas is called associated gas. Transportation refers to systems which are designed to move people and goods. It provides people with access to what they value and need to live their lives, build economies, and interact with the environment. Transportation is the backbone of a global network that trades over $18 trillion worth of goods and moves the world's population over 81 trillion kilometers every year. The system also impacts the climate. As of 2015, transportation accounted for 23% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. One way to understand this complex system is by breaking it down into three different components: mode, fuel type, and technology. Modes of transportation allow people and goods to move across air, land, and sea. People often move by human power, cars, and planes, while goods are transported by truck, rail, or ship. Fuel is the crucial element that propels the transportation system. The primary fuel types are derived from human power, renewable fuels, and fossil fuels. Different fuels and how they are consumed have distinct impacts on the climate and our air quality. When petroleum products are burned in vehicle engines, they release energy, but they also release greenhouse gases and other pollutants. Currently, 95% of transportation is fueled by petroleum. However, other fuels like electricity and biofuels are becoming increasingly prevalent as we adopt new technologies. Technology refers to what the vehicle uses to move. Like an internal combustion engine in a gas car or an electric motor in an electric vehicle. Technology is vary greatly in efficiency. Efficiency determines how much of the fuel is actually used to propel a vehicle versus energy lost in the process. Nuclear energy is the energy stored in the nucleus of an atom. Releasing this energy from the atom is what gives way to usable nuclear energy. The main way this is done is through nuclear fission. Nuclear power plants use nuclear fission to split apart atoms to form smaller atoms, which, in turn, releases energy and generates heat that typically turns a turbine. Solar energy, on the other hand, harnesses power from the sun. We can take radiation in the form of light from the sun and convert it into electricity. This is typically done through photovoltaic or PV cells, which are made of semiconductive materials like silicon. When sunlight is absorbed by PV cells, photons of light transfer that energy to electrons, which, in turn, creates energy in the form of an electric current as the electrons flow through the material. As such, solar energy is classified as a renewable energy source, since it is a source of energy that can theoretically regenerate and replenish itself indefinitely. While some argue that nuclear energy should also be classified as renewable, most agree that it is more accurately a sustainable energy source. This means that while nuclear power may not be seen as infinite, the rate at which it is consumed is insignificant compared to the amount of the supply. It's like the scale of energy sources. Sure, there is only a finite amount of the stuff, but who would ever eat so much of it that the world would run out? Greenhouse gases act as a layer of insulation, trapping some of the sun's warmth before it is released back into space. This process is known as the greenhouse gas effect. The primary greenhouse gases from energy production and consumption are methane and carbon dioxide. The rate at which we have added greenhouse gases to the atmosphere since industrialization is the leading cause of climate change. Climate change is causing extreme weather events, like droughts, floods, fires, and hurricanes. These events will increase in frequency if we do not reduce emissions in the atmosphere. For much of human history, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have been kept at safe levels by natural carbon sinks, such as oceans, forests, and wetlands. However, we are now adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere faster than natural carbon sinks can absorb them. When people talk about climate change, they often reference the average increase in temperature around the world. For instance, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has recommended a cap of 1.5 degrees Celsius as the maximum amount of average warming that can happen while maintaining a safe environment for people. The Solar Energy Technologies Office, or SETO, as we often refer to ourselves, supports innovation across the solar energy spectrum to reach lower costs of electricity and to support the transition to a decarbonized economy. We usually release several funding opportunities each year. And these funding opportunities come with topic areas that are designed to address critical spaces where we really want to accelerate innovation. SETO has a long history of supporting innovation in solar energy technologies, and these innovations, coupled with other advancements in the industry, have enabled solar costs to drop dramatically over the past decade, 70 to 80%. This is making solar electricity one of the cheapest forms, and in many areas, the country, the cheapest for new electricity generation today. It's critical that we continue to innovate and drive costs down further. Doing so will enable our electricity supply to be more affordable, and it will also accelerate solar deployment. Dubai administration has a goal of 100% clean electricity supply by 2035. Solar is going to have a huge role to play in getting to that goal. Solar could provide as much as 40% of electricity in a clean grid that's 10 times more than it's providing today. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we see the industry poised for dramatic growth both in deployment, as well as in manufacturing, supporting good-paying jobs and rapid growth toward our goal of having a clean electricity grid. The water we use today has been around for a long time. That is because water can recycle itself in the water cycle, which is also called the hydrologic cycle. Let's start the cycle with the evaporation of water from the surface of the ocean. As this moist air is lifted, it cools and water vapor condenses. It may form clouds. In fact, clouds are made up of tiny water droplets and ice crystals that are so small they can float in the air. This moisture in the atmosphere may be transported around the globe until it returns to the surface as precipitation. Precipitation may take the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Now, once this water reaches the ground, one or two processes may occur. Some of the water may evaporate back into the atmosphere, or the water may penetrate the surface and become groundwater. The groundwater may take several different paths. The groundwater may seep in its way into the oceans, river, or streams, or it may go into an aquifer, which is a body of saturated rock through which water can easily move. Or it may be released back into the atmosphere through transpiration. Transpiration occurs when leaves from trees and other vegetation give off water vapor through pores in their leaves. Some water on the Earth's surface is not absorbed by plants or become groundwater, and it becomes surface runoff. This runoff may empty into lakes, rivers, and streams, and then is carried back to the ocean where the cycle may begin. Mercury is the smallest planet in our solar system. Its diameter currently measures just over 3,000 miles, about the size of the continental United States. Like Earth, Mercury is a terrestrial planet with three main layers: a core, a mantle, and a crust. Only Mercury's crust has no tectonic plates. Also, its iron core is enormous by comparison, making up 85% of its radius, while Earth's inner and outer core account for just 55%. Because of the core's exceptional size, it has a surprising influence on Mercury's overall size. by causing it to shrink. The hot iron core has slowly cooled and contracted over the planet's 4.5 billion years. In doing so, it pulled Mercury's surface inward, and has caused the planet to shrink radially by more than 4 miles. This shrinking planet is also the planet closest to the Sun, orbiting our solar system's star at an average distance of roughly 36 million miles. Such proximity affects Mercury's atmosphere, or rather, the lack of one. It only has a very thin exosphere, which is traditionally the outermost layer of a planet's atmosphere. This exosphere is made of oxygen, sodium, hydrogen, helium, and potassium, all whipped up from the planet's surface by solar winds. El Niño is not a storm but rather a weather phenomenon in the Pacific Ocean. During an El Niño, the surface water temperature warms up, leading to complex weather patterns. South American fishermen in the 19th century, describing warmer waters during Christmastime, coined the name El Niño, Spanish for the Blessed Child. Nowadays, when sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Ocean rise 0.5 degrees Celsius over their historic average for 3 consecutive months, and once atmospheric conditions and rainfall patterns shift accordingly, scientists officially declare an El Niño. An El Niño event takes place about every 2 to 7 years. Normal east to west trade winds over the Pacific weaken and warm water that normally travels westward is now moving toward the east. Moisture then rises into the air and the effects of El Niño are felt throughout the Americas. In the ocean, warm water pushes colder water downward, blocking the important upwelling of nutrient-rich waters from the bottom. This causes some marine life to migrate to colder waters. Animals that normally feed on these sea life suffer, and fisheries throughout Central and South America suffer, too. Acid rain is any form of precipitation with high levels of nitric and sulfuric acids. It can occur in the form of snow, fog, and even dry materials that settle to Earth. Most acid rain is caused by human activities. When people burn fossil fuels, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are released into the atmosphere. These gases react with water, oxygen, and other substances to form sulfuric and nitric acid. Winds may spread these acidic solutions over hundreds of miles. After it falls to Earth, acid rain enters water systems as runoff and sinks into the ground. This can make water toxic to prey, fish, clams, fish, and other aquatic animals. The rest of the food chain, including non-aquatic species such as birds, is often affected as well. Acid rain also harms forests by damaging trees' leaves, robbing the soil of essential nutrients, and making it hard for trees to take up water. By designing cleaner power plants and using fewer fossil fuels, we can reduce the number of pollutants that create acid rain. A mutation is any random change in the DNA of a cell or an organism. DNA is a long helical molecule with all the instructions for how living things will develop. These changes can happen either through external factors, like radioactivity, or UV and X-rays, or through internal factors, such as when a cell is dividing and it incorrectly copies the DNA. DNA is the instruction book for how to make various molecular machines, proteins. Proteins make up an important aspect of our cells. They help our cells extract energy from food, do the housekeeping, and even make new proteins. These proteins and their function in the body lead to the traits that make us unique, like eye color or our blood type. Therefore, when the DNA changes, our proteins might also change, which could lead to a change in a trait. Most of the time, Mutations don't cause a significant change. These are considered neutral mutations. Sometimes, however, mutations can be good or bad. When they are bad, they lead to diseases, like cancer or cystic fibrosis. On the other hand, when they're good, it can allow an organism to more readily adapt to its environment. If you're near a railway yard in uncommonly cold temps, though, you may notice tracks pulling apart from one another, or bolts shearing off from joints. The shock of unusual cold can majorly stress the steel tracks. These would have been laid at what's called the neutral temperature, which represents a middle temperature of the surrounding environment. So, if the tracks were laid at 70 degrees, they can withstand both hot summer days and frigid winter nights. The problem comes with extreme weather. When the temps dip, say, to 30 below 0 Fahrenheit, the steel contracts enough that it can pull apart at the joints. Switches, too, risk getting frozen in place or jammed from snowfall. Luckily, railroad engineers have a tried-and-true method for avoiding railway damage, and it's the same method you employ to stay warm: they light a fire. Railroads place gas-fed heaters at various spots along the railway, often at switch points. When a cold snap hits, workers manually light the heaters, which steadily burn beside the tracks. The steel tracks don't ignite, and trains have steel wheels that won't catch fire as they roll down the railways. The sight may look like something from the gates of hell, but the small blazes are carefully managed. While other heating systems exist, running an electric current through the rails, or using hot air blowers, they can be costly or impractical. An open flame can keep you, and the railroads, cozy. It's easy to think of reasons why the internet might support migration. It provides easy access to information about other countries, and shifts material aspirations upward by showing what life is like elsewhere. Social media can give people insights into destination countries that may not have otherwise been on their radar. Social media could also make leaving home feel marginally easier, since it's a way to maintain contact with family across borders. On the other hand, there are reasons why the internet may discourage migration. The internet might contribute to economic growth and job creation in a country, decreasing people's desire to migrate in search of a better economic situation. Or it could enable more remote work, making it unnecessary to physically leave to find a better job. To find out exactly how the internet affected migration, researchers looked at data from the World Bank, the International Telecommunication Union, the Global Peace Index, the Arab Barometer, and the Gallup World Poll to track internet usage and migration patterns. The data showed positive associations between people's access to the internet and their willingness and actual decisions to migrate. This doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other, but it might. Whether we love the internet or hate it, nobody can argue that it isn't influential. People choke for many reasons. Choking under pressure is more than a flub. Choking happens when a person experiences a dramatic drop in his or her normal skill when under pressure. Choking results from a psychological event. Any situation that involves high pressure to succeed can cause choking. Whether you're giving the toast at a wedding or kicking that game-winning field goal, the importance of the event and the prospect of being judged by others can cause choking. Research shows that when activities require thinking, we're more prone to choke. And when we see familiar faces, our self-conscious pressure builds, making it even harder to think and perform. So, what can people do to ward off psychological choking hazards? First, Practice putting yourself in realistic, stressful practice situations, where you exercise hyper-attention to detail, such as when students take practice exams. Second, control your focus, if you're singing an aria. Put less attention on the step-by-step maneuvers of the performance and more on how your song fills the room. Last, rethink your stress. Remember that a beating heart and sweaty palms are signs that your body is ready to perform, not indications that you're going to fail. Health researchers are worried about the sleep health of people in the United States, generally. More than 1 in 3 U.S. adults sleep fewer than 7 hours per night, the minimum recommended by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. In 2020, a group of health researchers published a review summarizing data from many studies showing a relationship between wealth inequality and racial inequality and sleep problems in United States residents. Data published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention showed that people with lower income and racial and ethnic minorities get less sleep. More than 33% of those living in households with incomes below the poverty level chronically get fewer than 7 hours of sleep per night. This sleep gap is due to a complex system of disadvantages. People who work multiple jobs are 61% more likely to sleep fewer than 6 hours on a weeknight because of the time spent at work and commuting between jobs. High housing prices in urban centers push lower-income people farther out from those centers, forcing them to spend more time commuting to work. The stresses of food insecurity, discrimination, and unfavorable neighborhood characteristics play a role too. The researchers argue that sleep health is not simply a matter of individual choice, but involves multiple levels of influence. From interpersonal factors to community influences to the broader society. It's a trait, though, of an invasive species of insects commonly known as fire ants. These are some six-legged guests you don't want at your picnic. If you live in Texas or the southeastern United States, you've likely been warned about fire ants. Their name comes from their painful, venomous sting, which creates a burning sensation in their victim. First, the ant latches on with its strong mandibles. Then, it stabs its sharp stinger, repeatedly. The burning sting, combined with red coloration and aggressive behavior, certainly make them some fiery creatures. If you don't bother fire ants, they won't bother you. But beware knocking over a mound. The ants respond to disturbances. When they sense your movement, they won't hesitate to swarm. Once a single ant starts biting and stinging, its companions will follow suit. The stings leave red spots on your skin that eventually become unpleasant white pustules. Ouch! While there are methods to control fire ants, be sure to check with an expert first. In the meantime, if your picnic risks a fire ant run-in, maybe you should eat indoors. In the past 50 years, hundreds of millions of Americans have gotten the flu shot. If you're one of them, you might have experienced a pretty common side effect, a sore arm. Is this merely the result of getting a metal needle jabbed into your muscle? Nope. When you get a shot, your body starts working overtime in order to keep you healthy. A flu shot works by tricking your immune system into thinking a live flu virus has invaded your body. Really, the virus is inactivated, which means it's dead and can no longer infect you. But your body doesn't know that. To your body, the flu shot is full of dangerous antigens, foreign substances that create an immunologic response. And an immunologic response is when your immune system activates white blood cells to respond to an invader. Soon, once the vaccine deposits the antigens, your immune system jumps into action. It warms the injection site. Some white blood cells produce antibodies, who attack the antigen and latch onto it. Other cells whisk antigens away to different parts of your body, and still others call for reinforcements. All this activity means inflammation, and enough inflammation causes pain, as well as the occasional fever or swelling, if you're particularly unlucky. The good news, however, is that a little soreness means that the vaccine is doing its job. Consider the flu shot as a practice run for your immune system. By learning to respond to the harmless look-alike antigen of the vaccine, your body prepares itself to respond to the actual virus. White has become the standard color for airplanes' exteriors. While stylish, it's also a calculated decision by many airlines. White essentially reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it, like other colors do. This is great for keeping the plane's interior temperature down. It's the same as getting into a white car on a sunny day. Its inside is probably cooler than a black car's would be. And since constant exposure to sunlight often causes many colors to fade anyways, thanks to oxidation, white becomes a practical choice. White is easy to spot, whether in the air, on the ground, or in the case of a crash, in the sea. And it's easy to see cracks or chips in the paint when that paint is white. This detection is important because dirt and moisture can quickly collect in these chips, becoming sites of corrosion that could eat away at the aircraft's body. This is one reason, in fact, that planes are usually painted at all instead of being left as polished metal. Painted metal more readily resists corrosion than unpainted metal. You'll often see plastic, fiberglass, or carbon fiber painted white on planes, too. This is because these parts of the plane are easily susceptible to sun damage, which the white paint helps prevent. So why aren't all planes pure white? Advertising. After a white base, airlines will often paint their brand name on the side and their colors on the tail of the plane.